Welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
Guys, we're back for part 2.
Yay.
I can't wait to see where this one goes.
I know. I need to know if they ever caught the guy.
Yeah.
And where this...
Jenna, don't make that noise.
I'm just kidding.
Spoilers.
I'm sorry.
Gosh.
Maybe it just took a long time.
That certainly happens.
There's so much to this. So thank you so much for waiting for part 2.
For coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we are super excited to dive into this. You guys ready to go?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
go.
Awesome. Authorities are sharing composite sketches. They've pulled ballistic reports and even involved the FBI. The FBI's behavioral science unit starts formulating a profile. More on that soon. Patrols are alerted to keep an eye on businesses near I-70. But even as law enforcement scrambles, the killer strikes again, demonstrating a brazen confidence as if to taunt the police that you haven't caught me yet. Only 4 days later, on May 7th, 1992.
That's my half birthday.
Hey,
Sorry.
I am wondering if there was some in between that weren't connected.
because they're all really close, right?
Yeah.
There's also, and we'll cover it later, but they're not entirely sure if this was the last one.
There's a longer drive probably between Wichita and then Michael's murder, right? Is that further away?
I mean, like 700 miles again.
Okay. So not really.
No, because it's only 70 miles away from the first one.
Yeah.
But
So not
maybe
too
Kayla
much
can map
further.
quest it for us.
MapQuest.
Was
We
this
are
city
in the
Missouri?
90s today.
I don't know if that existed in the 90s.
I
What
don't
was
know.
the city in Missouri?
The city in Missouri, the first one was St. Charles.
Well, that was in Indiana, right?
No, that
Oh,
one's
that's
Missouri.
Missouri.
So it's Terre Haute
Oh, okay.
to St. Charles, Missouri.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait. No, those two were really close.
No, I meant between Wichita
Yes.
and Terre Haute.
Yeah. Wichita to Terre Haute. Sorry.
Okay. So St. Charles to Terre Haute is only 2.5 hours.
Okay.
It's only 181 miles. So then are we saying from
Terre
Wichita,
Haute to Wichita.
vice versa.
Yeah, Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
Terre Haute.
I mean, it's the same amount of miles. 605 miles, 8 hours and 38 minutes. Mhm.
Mm.
Terre Haute is on the way to Indianapolis.
Oh, interesting.
On the way back that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if there is more in between that they didn't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
They also could have been more sloppy. And so people wouldn't have recognized that they were the same person.
Maybe.
True. It does seem like a long break when all of the other ones we know about are so close together.
Just a few days apart.
Unless he's a trucker and is at home during those days.
Maybe. Yes, a break or something.
Mm-hmm. And only does it when he's out. I don't know. So only 4 days later, on May 7th, 1992, the final known murder of the I-70 spree takes place. This time it's in Raytown, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City. It's broad daylight, mid-afternoon, at a small strip mall called the Woodson Village Shopping Center. Here, 37-year-old Sarah Blessing is working alone inside her little shop. A metaphysical gift store, whimsically, sorry, I was like, I'm going to say that wrong. And then I psyched myself out.
You said it correctly. Good job.
Yes.
Thank you. Whimsically named the store of many colors. Sarah's store sells things like spiritual books, crystals, holistic items. It's the kind of peaceful place where one wouldn't expect any trouble. But on this day, evil walks right in the door. At about 6:30 p.m., the owner of the video rental store next door, Jack Don's Video, notices a man entering Sarah's shop. Moments later, the video store owner hears what sounds like a pop or a muffled gunshot. Concerned, he steps out to see what's happening. The man he saw earlier is now hastily leaving Sarah's store and quickly disappears around a corner. Sensing something is very wrong, the neighbor enters the store of many colors and discovers a horrifying sight. Sarah Blessing is lying on the floor in the back of her shop, a fatal gunshot wound to her head. She has been shot execution style just like the others. The Good Samaritan immediately calls for help, but it's too late. Sarah is beyond saving. Another innocent life has been cut short in an instant. This time, however, the killer's escape is observed. A clerk at a grocery store in the same plaza catches a glimpse of a man rushing from the direction of Sarah's shop and climbing a hill towards Interstate 70. It appears the shooter parked up by the highway for a quick getaway. This solidifies the pattern and the nickname, the I-70 killer. It's literally him using the interstate as his escape route. The Raytown murder is a brazen hit in a populated area. Early evening in a shopping center with at least 2 people hearing or seeing signs of a crime. But once again, the murderer melts away into the everyday traffic on I-70. By the time police set up roadblocks or alerts, it's likely he's miles away. It's as if he's a ghost who strikes and vanishes.
That's actually really smart not to drive up to the shop, because then you just see someone running away, but you can't ID them via a car or later pull them over. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Too smart.
Yes. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Raytown police join the now 4-state manhunt. This spree has reached its grim conclusion for now. 6 people dead at 5 scenes between April 8th and May 7th, all linked by ballistics and MO. It's just under a month, and this killer has inflicted terror across the Midwest. Then, just as suddenly as the murders began, they stop. After May 7th, the I-70 killer goes quiet. For the communities left in the wake, the fear is palpable. Residents in these cities lock their doors. They cast anxious looks at strangers. Store owners, especially women working alone, feel the chill of vulnerability. After all, the victims were mostly female store clerks killed in the middle of the day for no apparent reason. In Raytown, bakery owner Eliza Brettenbach, whose shop opened years later in the same plaza as Sarah Blessing's, remembers the cloud that hung over the town. How do you get over lives just being taken away for no reason? She asks, shaking her head at the senselessness. The shock of Sarah's murder and the realization of a serial killer on the loose haunted people long after 1992. Every few years, Breitenbach says a reporter would come by to do a story, and she'd rush over, hoping they had finally cracked the case, only to find that the case was ice cold.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Back in May 1992, things were far from cold. In fact, the investigation was at full throttle. The challenge was that the killer seemed to vanish after this last murder, leaving law enforcement scrambling to figure out who and where he might be before he struck again. Little did they know he might have already moved on to a new hunting ground, as we'll discuss later. Now, let's turn to how authorities linked these crimes and what they learned about the killer as they dug into one of the most perplexing manhunts of the era. By the time of Sarah's murder, detectives from Indiana, Kansas, and Missouri were in constant communication. A St. Charles detective had been the first to formally suspect the connection after Nancy's death. And once Missouri ballistics matched the others, all 5 murder scenes were conclusively linked. A multi-jurisdictional task force, informal at first, began pulling evidence. What did they know about the killer? Quite a bit on paper. All the murders were connected with a .22 caliber firearm. In fact, investigators identified the specific model as an Irma Werk HE .22 target pistol, a distinctive German-made semi-automatic with an extra long barrel, nearly a foot long.
Oh, wow.
This isn't your average handgun.
No. That's very specific.
Yes, it's an old-style target pistol, described by one detective as a historical remake of an old German Navy pistol, with a wooden firearm under its lengthy barrel. Not exactly the most concealable weapon to lug around.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And detectives agreed they were puzzled at this gun choice. Why would a serial killer use a quirky, antiquated 22 target pistol? Was it sentimental or just what he had on hand? The FBI profilers theorized the killer might have had an emotional attachment to the weapon. Perhaps it was passed down in his family, easy for him to access. Maybe it was a part of his ritual. Interestingly, crime lab techs noticed that some bullets had a reddish residue consistent with a jeweler's rouge, a polishing compound, suggesting the killer even hand polished or lubricated his ammo, likely to prevent jams in that aging pistol. Talk about dedication. This guy literally buffed his bullets before going on his murderous errands.
Wow.
Yeah, awful. Presumably to make sure that his antique gun wouldn't malfunction. As dark as it is, one can't help imagining him in a motel room at night, cleaning that old weird gun like it's his prized possession. It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
Profilers looked at the victim profile, with the exception of Michael McCown, the male victim from Indiana. All the victims were women, specifically petite women in their 20s or 30s, most with long, dark hair.
Uh-oh.
I know.
I think I'm tall.
Yeah. I'm not.
You have cut blonde in your hair.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't.
You don't work at a retail store.
That's true.
They were all working alone or in small groups, which again, except the Wichita double murder where the two women were together. There were no signs of sexual assault in any of the cases. This wasn't about personal grudges. It seemed the killer targeted women who were alone and vulnerable, as if fulfilling some twisted fantasy of power. The FBI's first crack at profiling noted the unknown suspect, probably had a deep resentment or hatred towards women, and killing provided some perverse satisfaction. When he shot those clerks, it might have been the one thing that made him feel in control.
I think that's especially true with how they were murdered as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like execution style from behind.
Yeah.
Yep. Ugh. Don't hear that very often.
No, you don't.
The motive or lack thereof is perhaps one of the most confounding aspects. There's just no motive. This guy didn't rob stores for significant gain. Only trivial cash was taken, almost like an afterthought. I like the gas idea, though. I think that could be.
It's a lot of driving.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know the victims. He just walked in, killed them, and left. FBI profiler Larry Ankrum commented on how unprecedented this is. Nobody does anything like this, he said, where they don't have a motive. Ted Bundy had a motive. John Wayne Gacy had a motive. Jeffrey Dahmer had a motive. Those infamous killers all had their motives, whether it was sexual, psychological, etc. But the I-70 killer at first glance had no motive except murder itself. He was like a specter who killed just because. As Akram theorized, it was almost, he thinks, like a sexual thing for the killer. Not with the victim, but the act of killing itself was his gratification. He'd plan it in his mind, drive along the highway, hunting for the right opportunity, find a lone woman, shoot her, and then, almost like some sort of sexual event, it's over. He has to go someplace and literally collapse, Akram said, describing the killer's presumed adrenaline crash after the high of his murders. In other words, the spree was the killer living out a fantasy over and over, a fantasy with no long-term goal beyond the act itself. If it sounds warped and inexplicable, that's because it is. Even the FBI had a hard time wrapping their heads around someone killing purely for the thrill. Thanks to the Wichita eyewitnesses and at least one Missouri witness, police had compiled a fairly consistent description of the suspect. He was a white male in his mid-20s to mid-30s, in 1992. He had a slight build, either 5'7" to 5'9", sandy blonde or reddish hair, and lazy or droopy eyelids. In Wichita, he had been seen wearing a military-style jacket. In Houston, a later case that we'll get into, the survivor noted brown cowboy boots. These are small details, but they paint a picture of a nondescript drifter blending into Middle America, the kind of guy who could walk into a shop and not raise alarm until he pulled out his gun. All 5 confirmed crime scenes were near Interstate 70, and they all occurred on weekdays or that one on Sunday in daylight or early evening hours. This suggested that the killer might have been traveling for work or had a job that involved being on the road during the week. The FBI analysts looked at the geography and the timing and actually made an educated guess about the killer's home base. Given the pattern of movement, Indianapolis to Wichita, which is westward, then back to Indiana, then to Missouri, they theorized the killer likely lived somewhere in the middle, maybe in the Indianapolis area in 1992. Essentially, they think he started at home, drove out west for a hit, Kansas, then was heading back east with stops along the way. This boomerang route strongly pointed to an Indiana-based individual. Decades later, Detective Stepp in St. Charles echoed this. Both times the FBI profiled, they believe the killer is from the Indianapolis area. This means our unknown suspect probably had a life in Indiana, perhaps a family, a job, neighbors, all while secretly embarking on a murderous road trip. And chillingly, Stepp added, there's nothing out there saying he is not alive. I'll bet he's alive and out there.
So does this mean that this is still a cold case?
Yes.
No.
This is a serial killer cold case, which is wild.
Yes.
It is wild.
I don't like that.
No, no, not at all.
Especially because of how young he was in 1992.
Yeah. He could still be out there.
Oh, yeah. Don't look at me like that.
Sorry. Well, I'm curious. Did any other sprees happen at any other time? Have there been any other murders similar?
Well, you mentioned Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are others.
Oh, that's comforting.
So just a month at a time. Had to go get his fix a couple times, I guess. It went dormant until he decided to do it again. Lovely.
And that's kind of the crazy part is they link those ones, but there are others that are definitely linked. And there's one on security surveillance.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And they still haven't caught him?
I thought they were going to with that one.
Yeah.
I guess if you're just walking in, nobody puts up a fight. It's one shot and 22 caliber is fairly common, isn't it?
Not the type that
Not
he
the
had,
type of
though.
gun, yeah.
Yeah. Which is why it's possible that once they put all this out here, he got rid of it or buried it in the basement and picked a new type. So, given all of this, the I-70 killer's profile was shaping up as is a youngish white male, likely from central Indiana, who for unknown reasons had a compulsion to stalk and kill women working alone in stores using a vintage .22 pistol. He was organized enough to travel and evade capture, yet disorganized in motive, no clear reason or pattern to victim selection beyond availability. He left very little, basically no evidence behind. There are no known fingerprints, no DNA. Remember, this is 1992. DNA tech was in its infancy. He did leave the shell casings, which tied the crime scenes together, but that was only useful after the fact. Essentially, the investigators had the what and the how, but nothing to give them the who.
Or the why.
Exactly. The public was now aware and on edge, and obviously hungry for answers. Composite sketches were released in the media, and the I-70 killer became nightly news. Police received hundreds of tips from people claiming they saw someone matching the sketch or reporting suspicious activities, ex-boyfriends, creepy customers, you name it. Detectives painstakingly ran down these leads. St. Charles PD files grew by the thousands of names as they checked truck drivers, traveling salesmen, drifters with criminal records, any hint of a suspect. Investigators even looked at known serial killers in the region. One name that inevitably came up was Herb Baumeister, an Indianapolis area man who would later be suspected of killing multiple men, which is the I-70 Strangler case. He was active in the early 90s and lived off of I-70, but his victims were homosexual men that he lured from bars, completely different MO and victim type. He was eventually ruled out. The I-70 killer's targets and style was unique. This wasn't a known killer doing double duty. It appeared to be someone entirely off law enforcement's radar. Despite the massive effort, no prime suspect emerged in 1992. The case grew cold as the weeks and months passed without another attack or a solid lead. Police were left with haunting near misses. If only that Wichita witness had called sooner. If only someone had spotted the killer's car. If only there had been surveillance cameras in those stores. But 1992 was largely pre-CCTV, especially in small shops. One detective on the case later confessed the impotence they felt. What's left? We don't know. This is odd, an officer told reporter Bob Cypress at the time. When asked if it was robbery or rape or anything similar, it was odd indeed, a murderer who really fit no template. The FBI tried to refine their profile in a second go-around, but it didn't add much beyond reinforcing the basics. The killer remained a ghost. Every scene had its own story, journalist Bob Cypress reflected. They had something in common. Each murder was a short distance from I-70. The highway was the one thread connecting the tales of horror. And so, for lack of a better target, police focused on the roads. They quietly circulated the composite sketch to truck stops, rest areas, and all motels along I-70. Tips trickled in, but led nowhere definitive. As months rolled on with no new murders, some hoped maybe the killer died in a car crash or got arrested on unrelated charges, effectively stopping his spree. Others feared he might strike again somewhere else under a different pattern. They were both right, in a sense. The story was not quite finished. The I-70 killer may have simply moved his reign of terror to a different interstate the next year. This case was about to get even more complicated. Just when authorities thought the storm had passed, new murders in 1993 raised eyebrows. Over a year after the Midwest killings, in the fall of 1993, a pair of eerily similar crimes occurred in Texas. Far from I-70, but along the busy I-35 and I-45 corridors. The question arose, had the I-70 killer resurfaced in the Lone Star State? On September 25, 1993, 51-year-old Mary Ann Glasscock was working alone in the Forium Antique Store in Fort Worth, Texas. She was found shot in the shop with a small caliber bullet wound to the back of the head. Money was taken from the register, but again, not a large amount. This scene felt like deja vu. A petite woman, solo in a retail store, killed execution style with minimal robbery. No witnesses caught sight of the killer. Then, on November 1st, 1993, 22-year-old Amy Vess was murdered in Arlington, Texas, at a dance apparel store. Same scenario. Young woman clerk alone in a little shop, shot in the head. These Texas locations were all near interstate highways, I-35 West in Fort Worth, and I-30 in Arlington, which connected to the I-35. Again, no witnesses, minimal money stolen. Local police were baffled, but investigators in the Midwest took notice. The MO was strikingly similar to the I-70 murders, enough that a task force in Texas started informally corresponding with the I-70 case detectives. The most compelling incident was an attempted murder on January 15, 1994, in Houston, Texas. 35-year-old Vicki Webb was working at an alternatives gift shop when a man came in and struck up a conversation. Something felt off about him. Within minutes, he pulled out a gun and shot Vicki in the back of the neck. She fell to the floor, paralyzed, but miraculously still conscious. Thinking fast, Vicki decided to play dead. Perhaps the only reason she's alive today.
Oh, wow.
As she later recounted, I laid there thinking, oh my gosh, I am in trouble. But she kept perfectly still. The shooter then jumped over the counter, took about $50 from the register, and then checked a storage room, maybe looking for someone else. Vicki recalls only seeing his feet. He wore brown cowboy boots. Her breathing was so shallow, he likely couldn't tell she was alive. The gunman returned to Vicki's limp body, rolled her over, and chillingly pulled her pants partway off. Not in a sexual way, but possibly to make sure she had no weapon or just to desecrate the scene in some way. Vicki noted she was not raped or sexually assaulted, but the act is still disturbing. Then he placed the gun against her forehead to finish the job. Click. The gun misfired.
Wow.
Imagine lying paralyzed, laying dead, praying for your life, and hearing that dry click of the trigger.
That's so scary.
It's really scary.
But
horrifying.
Terrible that she's paralyzed. But I mean, how lucky for her that it misfired.
He must have been able to tell she was still alive because one of the first crime scenes, Patricia had lived for a little while after. And he hadn't shot more than once at any of them.
Maybe he could hear like her shallow breathing or something, possibly.
Well, what's interesting is everyone else he shot in the back of the head, but her he shot in the back of the neck. So maybe he felt like he needed to,
like he had missed
complete the ritual, shoot her in the back of the head.
That might be true too. Vicki recalls those seconds. Time stood still. Then he just laughed. He's a very sick man. Yes, the shooter laughed out loud at his gun misfiring, as if amused that fate gave him this twisted joke. Enraged or maybe bemused, he heard noises outside. A couple approaching the store and fled, leaving Vicki in a pool of blood. She had to lie there for agonizing minutes until customers finally found her and she weakly whispered, "Excuse me, can you get me some help?
Oh my gosh.
I have been shot." Vicki Webb survived by sheer luck and courage, the only known survivor of the I-70 killer's attacks, if indeed this was him. In all three Texas cases, the MO matched the I-70 killer closely. Small shops, lone clerks, again, all women, though Mary Ann was a little bit older than the previous victims. Same general approach of quick execution-style shooting with minimal robbery. Vicki Webb's description of her assailant and his behavior meshed with what was known. A white male, somewhat soft-spoken, they had chatted briefly, methodical, and utterly remorseless, even laughing when the gun didn't fire. Police in Texas and the Midwest began to suspect that they were dealing with the same man, now nicknamed in some circles the I-70/35 killer, since he appeared to have moved from the I-70 corridor to the I-35 or I-45 area. However, a big twist came from forensics. The Texas bullets did not match the pistol from the 1992 killings.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
I wonder if he saw like on the news.
Or if, because it was so old, maybe, you know, how he was trying to make the bullets actually fire. Maybe it was getting stuck more and more.
Maybe.
I'm not sure, but it is interesting.
Could be why he laughed when the other one didn't fire. Almost like a nod to the one before if he didn't end up switching.
Gosh, that is probably spot on. I didn't think of that.
And creepy.
Yeah.
Very creepy.
But makes more sense than just looking at it a different way, right? Ballistic tests indicated a different .22 firearm was used in Texas. This caused a split opinion among investigators. Some, like Detective Mike Crook from Indianapolis, felt that it had to be the same killer despite the different gun. The similarities in scenario and victim profile were too strong to ignore. Others were skeptical, pointing out that a copycat could have been at work or that it was simply a coincidence of similar crimes.
Did Vicky give a similar description?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of shows that it probably was the same person.
Yeah. And still using a .22.
Yeah.
Journalist Bob Cyphers admitted he might have inadvertently played a role in this. Back in '92, he pressured police to release the make of the gun to the public. The theory goes that if the I-70 killer heard the news reporting his gun's description, he might have ditched that weapon. Indeed, after the information went public, the 1992 murder stopped. And then the Texas murders with a different gun happened. Some detectives quietly wondered if that detail had been kept secret just a bit longer, would the killer have kept using the same gun and possibly slipped up? As Cyphers put it, some police feel if we didn't release that information and he kept murdering, we'd have gathered more evidence and we'd eventually have caught him. It's a dark what if. Of course, the media's job is to inform the public, especially when a killer is at large. People in 1992 had a right to know that a serial killer might have been prowling I-70. But it's true that the publicity might have spooked the culprit into altering his methods. Regardless, to this day, officially, the Texas cases are quote-unquote suspected, but not confirmed to be the I-70 killer. The survivor, Vicky Webb, certainly believes it's the same man. He was there to kill whoever happened to be there, she said. That attacker was a cold-blooded predator just like the I-70 culprit. It wasn't a simple robbery. Authorities note the many similarities, but the changed weapon leaves just this sliver of doubt. We may never know for sure unless the killer is caught and confesses, or forensics finds another link. As for Vicky Webb, her testimony is harrowing and invaluable. She provided details on the man's attire, the cowboy boots, and his behavior. Interestingly, she never saw his face. She only heard him and saw his boots before being shot. Her case didn't yield a new composite sketch because of this. But her survival gives a window into the killer's mindset. Think about how chilling it is that after shooting her, he calmly roamed the store, rifled through the till, checked for other victims, then came back to make sure she was dead, even removing her pants possibly to stage or confuse the scene, and finally trying to point blank shoot her in the head. The only thing that saved her was that faulty cartridge or some kind of jam. And his response was to laugh. That detail sticks with me. It suggests he might have been deriving some kind of pleasure from the situation. Maybe in his sick mind, it was ironically funny that he otherwise meticulously maintained this weapon. Because remember the polished bullets from before, and now it failed him at this moment. Or maybe he laughed out of relief that nobody walked in sooner. Either way, like Vicky observed, he really is a very sick man. These Texas incidents extended the timeline of the cases into 1994. After January 1994, no further linked crimes were identified. Did he stop for good then? We're not entirely sure because there's actually one more case to consider, which happened years later back in Indiana. And it's possibly the guy popping up again. For most of the 1990s, the I-70 killer case sat gathering dust, with occasional tip flurries when a similar crime occurred somewhere. But in November 2001, something happened that raised eyebrows in Vigo County, Indiana, which is Terre Haute County. On the evening of November 30th, 2001, a 31-year-old store clerk named Billy Brossman was working alone at the 7th and 70 liquor store in Terre Haute. The shop's name itself is almost poetic. 7th and 70, right by Interstate 70. A man walked in, pulled a gun, and robbed the cash register. Then he forced Brosman to the back of the store and executed him with a single shot to the back of the head. Execution style. The entire chilling act was caught on security camera, including a clear view of the perpetrator's face. Yes, you heard that right. By 2001, many businesses had surveillance cameras, and this crime was recorded in clean as can be quality, according to investigators.
And they still didn't find him.
No, they did not.
They don't have a name or anything from that.
It gets even more wild. When Terre Haute police reviewed the footage, they saw a white male suspect, somewhat older looking, likely late 30s or 40s, which, remember, 10 years ago, they said 20s or 30s, with a firearm. They could hardly believe it. The scene was strikingly similar to the I-70 murders of 92. It even happened just 7 blocks away from the spot where Michael McCown was killed in 92. The killer's method in the video, which authorities just said was so awful to watch after the fact. It was quickly controlling the clerk, taking the cash, then marching him to the back and shooting him in the head. It was exactly the I-70 killer's MO. But who was this guy on the tape? Surely now they'd have a face to match to a name, right? Despite having the video, authorities were unable to identify the man. They released the surveillance images to the public, hoping someone would recognize him. Tips came in, comparisons were made, but shockingly, no match was ever found.
That's horrible. I don't know the correct, wild, horrible. I can't believe they have an actual picture of his face.
How does no one know him?
Right?
How has no one seen him?
And he's going into this place that has CCTV, and he isn't even afraid to walk in without covering his face.
Well, yeah, if it's the same guy, he's gotten away with it for over almost 10 years.
Right? But he wasn't on CCTV and any of the other places.
Yeah. But maybe just confident enough to think he's fine to get away with it again.
And then after your picture's out there, wouldn't you be nervous to go into any store or anything like that?
I would think so.
I would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, tips did come in. People made comparisons. They gave, this kind of looks like so-and-so, but no match was found. It was as if the killer on tape had no record or was not local. And perhaps he looks so average that none of the tips panned out definitively. It was a huge disappointment. Like getting a photo of Bigfoot and still not being able to prove who or where he is.
I feel like that lends to a serial killer MO, being more of a loner to yourself. Maybe he didn't have friends.
True.
Maybe people just didn't know him, especially if he was a trucker or drove a lot. And
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. If he's driving cross country frequently, then maybe he's not in one spot long enough for people to recognize him.
Yeah.
And maybe his home base isn't Indiana anymore.
Yeah. Especially if some of those happened in Texas.
Right. That could
if
be.
He gets transferred for work.
Yeah.
Takes on a new route, something.
Yep.
That's true. For years, the 2001 liquor store murder was a cold case. It wasn't officially tied to the I-70 killer, but in the back of many investigators' mind, the link was tantalizing. Finally, in 2021, so 20 years later, by the way, as part of a renewed effort, Terre Haute police publicly announced that they considered the I-70 killer a possible suspect in the Billy Brosman murder. Essentially, they finally acknowledged that he was a suspect, which many had long suspected. This same killer might have struck again in 2001 after years of laying low. If that's true, it suggests the I-70 killer didn't die or get locked up after 1994. He was still out there. Or maybe he was locked up for 5 years or 6 years.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that if they ran facial recognition, that they would have been able to identify him if he had been in the prison system?
You would think so.
Yeah, I would.
So I would think that he has probably just been living off the map somewhere, drifting around the country.
Waiting until he felt like he needed to do it again. Or they was doing it and just maybe changed how he was doing it a little bit to stay out of the spotlight. I don't know.
Yeah, that thought comes to mind. And then also you hear so many of them where the time in between gets less and less. But then you have the outliers like BTK who did go for years and years and years without doing anything else. It could be either one.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to not know exactly.
Well, and it could be he had that spree at the beginning and then maybe kind of the opposite. It's been spacing out. Maybe there's some that are out there that weren't connected.
I feel like that has to be true.
In other parts of the country.
Thinking back to Dexter, the Trinity killer.
I was thinking the same thing.
How he has 3 and then 3 kills. And then later in the show, they find out that it's 4, but they never connected the first murder there. You know, there's a lot of possibility that maybe it was slightly different or they just didn't know about the other murders. So it just never got flagged.
Especially in the early 90s, mid 90s. I don't think the communication between all the police departments, especially when you don't have DNA. Right. You know, because you can put that into CODIS and you can connect it from all over the country. But he didn't leave DNA.
Yeah.
Even if they could have used that, they're not connecting it other than hearing about it.
Well, and maybe he was out on the coast, like California, Oregon, Washington, and they're not talking to the Midwest because they were looking at I-70, but maybe he was traveling over in that area or on the East Coast or something, or Florida or, somewhere different where they're not maybe hearing about those murders.
Who's to say those were even the first ones? If they think he's late 20s, early 30s, that these murders could have started in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. If he's mid 30s in 92, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which would only make him 40s by 2001, which now 60s. That's unsettling.
Yeah. They'll be out there.
Detectives are trying to figure out if, he just decided to pop back into his old hunting ground, Terre Haute, 9 years later, to relive his old habit. But why only once in 2001? Who knows? Serial killers have been known to have the dormant periods that we just talked about, or that could have been the only time he got caught on camera, or that it was linked depending on where he was. And again, just speculation, but it's not impossible. One detail, the weapon in 2001 wasn't recovered to public knowledge. So we don't know if this was yet another 22 or something else. They didn't find the shell casing. Regardless, the similarity of the MO and the location is hard to ignore. The 2001 killer even chose a store at 7th and 70, right off the interstate, when he's been called the I-70 killer. And again, could be a copycat, could be somebody who grew up hearing about it and decided to do the same. If it's the same man, by then he'd be, like we talked about, 40s, maybe 30s, depending. The security footage gave a decent look at a face aging from the composite drawn in 1992. But lacking a name to go with the face, the case remained unsolved. As one investigator put it recently, there's surveillance tape of the killer, but nobody could identify the man. In the years since, technology has improved, and now they're revisiting the footage with fresh eyes and new tips. According to Bob Cypress, in the 2020s, the police have gotten a few promising leads from people who think they recognize the person in the 2001 video. That could be huge if it pans out. So now we have a case that spans nearly a decade of sporadic crimes. 1992 confirmed, 93 and 94 suspected, 2001 suspected. Through it all, the perpetrator has managed to avoid identification. It's a testament to how carefully this killer operated, leaving minimal evidence, choosing quick kills, and yes, some degree of luck on his part, or lack of luck on law enforcement's part. At this point, many of the original detectives have retired. Families have grown older without answers. One could easily lose hope. Nancy's grieving parents would, in later years, keep fighting to remind the public of the case. Every single day we think about her, Carol said in a 2016 interview from First Alert 4. Dawn urged anyone with knowledge to come forward. There's no reason not to say anything. It benefits society, and it would benefit us. Their daughter's life was stolen for no reason other than a stranger's whims, and they, like the other victim's family, have had to live with decades of unanswered questions. But the story isn't quite over. In fact, recent years have been a resurgence of effort on this cold case, driven by the new technology and the sheer determination of a few key individuals who refuse to let it go.
I feel like by this time, with the picture of his face, I want them to find someone. And I feel like that should be possible other than just asking for tips.
I mean, like, check it against driver's license.
Yeah.
Like, is that
That's
possible?
what I was just thinking.
That's what I was wondering too.
Yeah.
It seems
Obviously,
like they
he's
should be able
driving.
to do that.
Yeah.
Right. You would have to have a driver's license for more things than just driving, too.
Yeah.
Where do we get that database?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's just start with Indianapolis.
Yeah.
By 2021, it had been nearly 30 years since the 1992 I-70 killing spree. Many people assumed the case was unsolvable, a ghost story from the 90s. But we know DNA can solve any case, right?
Yes.
Not yet, but they will.
Coming.
It's
They
coming.
don't have
Yes.
DNA though.
Yeah.
They don't, but
They have the
touch
casings.
DNA analysis, depending on what was preserved, right?
Yeah.
You would think to force someone to go to the back, he might have touched one of the victims. Maybe not, but it's possible. How did he get into the cash register? Did they all open it for him? Because it seems like a lot of them, he went to it after,
Mm-hmm.
which also happened, in our survivor, Vicki Wells
Yeah.
experience.
Did they say anything about finding fingerprints?
They said no fingerprints, but touch DNA, if they swabbed it all and saved it, it's catching up. They could literally link you based on like your sweat.
Oh,
Mm-hmm. If you sweat on a doorknob, they can now link it to you.
that's wild.
I know. How cool, right?
That is cool.
Did they save like the shell casings? Was
Mhm.
there any?
The shell
Thing on that?
casings, and they know that it was polished.
Yeah,
He could have done it with gloves.
he could have.
If you're polishing it, you're wiping off fingerprints, essentially.
Yeah, but then you'd still have to load it into whatever you're.
Yeah,
If
I
he's
mean, he could have
polishing
been
it
wearing
with a
gloves.
towel and finishes polishing it, holding it with the towel, pushing it in there.
He could, yeah. Or it could be wearing gloves too. But
That too, yeah.
It doesn't sound like any of the witnesses saw him wearing gloves. So if he touched those cash registers,
then there
Good.
should be something.
If they swabbed
If they
and
swabbed it.
kept it.
Yeah.
yep, hoping that DNA technology would catch up
Yeah.
because that was not even on the radar 30 plus years ago.
Be interesting to see if they have anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed. The St. Charles Police Department in Missouri is not ready to close the book. They spearheaded a renewed I-70 killer task force in 2021 in collaboration with Indianapolis, Wichita, Terre Haute, Raytown, and the FBI. Detectives, young and old, gathered to retrace every step of the case. What my role has been is going back to the very beginning, said Detective Kelly Rhodes of St. Charles PD, who was assigned full-time to hunt this killer. They literally dusted off boxes of case files, they re-interviewed witnesses, and they applied modern forensic techniques to old evidence. Things that were basically sci-fi in 1992, like touch DNA analysis, are now very real. And they aimed to squeeze every drop of information from the remaining evidence. One of the first public moves of the task force came in January 2022 when they released an age-enhanced composite sketch of the I-70 killer. Using the original witness descriptions, modern software, they generated an image of what a man with those features might look like in his 50s or 60s. This new sketch depicted an older, still thin white man, possibly graying hair, but with those same hooded, lazy eyes and same general facial structure. Authorities stated the suspect would likely be between 52 and 70 years old, which was 2022, so 55 to 73 now. They hoped this might jog someone's memory. Maybe a relative or acquaintance would say, "Hey, that looks like so-and-so." Meanwhile, evidence from the crime scenes was being submitted to modern labs. DNA testing was a huge focus. Back in 1992, they did collect some evidence like strands of hair or touched objects, but at the time, they either couldn't get DNA profiles or they didn't even bother to try because the technology wasn't advanced. Now, with touch DNA and our advanced extraction methods, the task force is trying things that were impossible before. For example, they're attempting to get DNA from the shell casings left at the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the killer's fingers or sweat left microscopic traces on the bullets or the casings. If so, today's techniques could pull a genetic profile. As of the last updates, no definitive DNA hit has been made. The results so far have been a quote-unquote dead end on items tested, but investigators remain optimistic. Each year, DNA tech improves, and a partial profile could eventually link to a relative in a genealogy database, as we've seen in other cold cases that are now getting cracked, which has been some of my favorite. And if this case ever gets cracked, we are doing an update.
We'll have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I want an update.
I know. It's on my Google alerts, I promise. The task force also re-engaged the public with media pushes. And then true crime shows and podcasts, maybe like this one, have spotlighted the I-70 killer anew. People Magazine Investigates did a TV episode. A&E ran articles, and a local news station from all involved states ran segments around the 30th anniversary. Detective Rhodes said that not a week goes by without new tips coming in since publicity ramped up. Sometimes it sparks a memory, Rhodes noted, explaining how an old acquaintance might recall a suspicious coworker, or a prison inmate might share a story about another guy's confession. Leads pour in, some credible, many not, but each is followed up. Rhodes and her colleagues have an unwavering commitment. Every single one of these people, their lives mattered. We are not going to stop. We are not going to give up. It's a sentiment shared by all the detectives who have worked this case. In fact, Bob Cyphers noted, some of the detectives told me the one case they want solved before they go is this one. It haunts them, and they're racing against time as both they and the suspect age. The task force also brought back some veteran investigators who had worked the case in the 90s. Pairing them with younger tech-savvy officers, old case notes were reviewed for anything that might have been missed. There were some aha moments. For instance, did anyone ever trace owners of Irma Welk's ET-22 pistols in the U.S.? That gun was not common. So they've been looking at sales records, serial numbers, etc. Also, remembering the FBI profilers were pretty sure the guy was from Indianapolis. They've been combing through Indiana records of known offenders or suspicious incidents around that same time.
Did they do that before, or are they just redoing it now? Because I feel like that should have been something they should have done to look at the specific type of pistol in the U.S.
But how?
There is a gun. There's a gun database.
There is now. Was there at the time?
There was in the 90s.
Okay.
However,
if it was bought in the 80s before
or passed down over many generations, no.
That's what I'm saying. It might not be in there, or they may not have been able to track it as easily if not everything is in a database.
Yeah. I'm more so just wondering if they even tried before.
Yeah.
Or if they're just redoing it. Like if they're redoing it now or if it had already been done before.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about the databases that are popping up then, like CODIS and the gun serial number database, is they weren't all inclusive and they took a long time to compile.
Yeah.
So even if they did do those things back then, you could find new results now, right? Yeah. Especially if you wanted to get rid of it and sold it. My guess is it's in the bottom of the ocean or something.
Yeah.
But you never know.
Right?
If it was a family heirloom, it might just be in a safe or something also.
Or in the basement in a box.
Yeah.
So far, nothing has come from that either. Interestingly, in 2022, after the unrelated I-65 killer, another highway serial killer from Indiana, was identified through DNA, there was buzz about whether he could possibly be the I-70 killer. The I-65 killer, who was Harry E. Greenwell, had a lazy eye in photos, which made some wonder if he was the droopy-eyed phantom from I-70. But Greenwell's crimes were a decade earlier in the 1980s, and he died in 2013. Most officials doubt he's connected, and DNA from I-65 cases don't match anything that they've tested so far from the I-70 cases. Still, it shows this desperate search for answers and that every stone is being overturned. The cold case investigators remain hopeful. St. Charles Detective Stepp said in 2022, "We believe this case is solvable. We're not going to give up on this case." They point to advances that have cracked cases even older than this. For example, the BTK killer was caught after 30 years. Although, side note, by his own dumb antics. The Golden State Killer after 40 years. In the I-70 case, they have ballistics, they have a composite, they have some physical evidence. It's not nothing. And importantly, they have the public's interest again. Bob Cypher's book, Dead End, Inside the Hunt for the I-70 Killer, was published in 2023. And he has been touring with it around the cities involved to keep awareness up.
How wild would that be if he was the killer?
Oh,
that's a movie right there.
I know, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, trademark that. Let's write that.
Okay. No one steal that.
No, that's Kayla's, and that's Kayla's. I wrote this book for the police departments to try to keep the story alive.
And keep them off my back.
We're just kidding, Bob Cyphers. We're really appreciative of your book.
Definitely kidding. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm funny.
I think you're funny too.
Thank you.
But I don't want to get sued.
Yeah, me neither. Kidding.
But fictionally, that would be very interesting. He says even one person reading it and picking up the phone with a tip could crack this case. It just takes one tidbit. Maybe someone remembering a family member who owned an old Irma work pistol and traveled a lot in the 90s. Or a guy who's suspicious suspiciously moved away right after 1992, maybe to Texas. Every few years, hope is rekindled, and then it kind of fades if leads don't pan out. But this time, it feels different to those involved. As of the latest updates in 2024 and even 2025, the task force continues. They've explicitly said there's no set timeline for how long they'll keep a detective on it, meaning as long as there are leads to chase, someone will be working this case. And truly, until the killer is identified, the communities affected will never forget the victims or stop seeking justice. The hope is that this story will finally have an ending. It's been over 3 decades since a thin, red-haired gunman terrorized the ribbon of highway known as I-70. Yet, the case of the I-70 killer remains a tantalizing enigma, so close to solved in some ways, and yet so far. Over the years, investigators came frustratingly close to catching him numerous times. A witness actually stood face-to-face with the killer in Wichita. A surveillance camera filmed him in Terre Haute. He left behind spent shells at every scene and even left a living victim in Houston. And still, he slipped through the cracks. It's almost as if he was some dark phantom of the highways, always one step ahead, or just lucky enough to avoid leaving that one piece of evidence that would nail him. For the families of the victims and the suspected victims in Texas, and then again in Indiana in 2001, the ordeal is not over. They've lived with grief compounded by uncertainty. Why were their loved ones taken, and who did it? Those questions linger painfully. As time marched on, some relatives have passed away without ever seeing justice. But others continue to fight to keep the memory of the victims alive. They attend memorials, speak to the press, and cooperate with documentary makers, all to ensure these cold cases are never forgotten. There is, strangely, a bit of poetic dark justice in the fact that the case has refused to die. The I-70 killer likely believed he got away with it scot-free. He might be an old man now, thinking that no one will ever knock on his door about those crimes from 1992. But he'd better not get too comfortable. Cold case detectives today have tools he never could have imagined, and they are patient. As one lawman said recently, just knowing we did everything, absolutely everything we possibly could, in 30 years, so much has changed. They're not giving up, and neither are the families or the public. In the end, the story of the I-70 killer is a chilling whodunit that leaves us with an image. A lone man driving down the interstate, gun on the passenger seat, scanning for the next exit, and a neon open sign where a victim unwittingly waits. It's the stuff of road trip nightmares. It's also a story of unfinished business, a dead end that isn't truly the end. As long as the highway of justice is open, investigators will keep traveling it, searching for the final destination, the truth. And when they find it, when the I-70 killer's identity is finally revealed, we'll look back and marvel at how close they were so many times. Until then, we remain intrigued and horrified by this case, hoping that one day soon we can update the ending of this narrative from an unsolved mystery to a solved case. What do you guys think?
I don't like the ones that aren't solved, especially the serial killer ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy how much was left behind. Like, he didn't seem to clean up at all, which is crazy that we weren't able to find anything. I mean, I'm grateful that they still have so much evidence to comb through, but just wild that nobody was ever even really brought in for questioning or ever even really a suspect.
Right.
That's, I think, what is wild to me, because I know in a lot of other cases, you know, they at least have some suspects, but
Even
this
if
one
they're
sees that
wrong.
there's truly, there's truly no suspect.
Mhm.
Like you said, just a phantom.
Ghost.
Yeah.
Which is wild because they have a photo.
Yeah.
And even if he isn't the same person as the 1992 ones, I feel like that should have at least given them some sort of a lead that they could have started to follow up on. But
Or at least to solve the 2001 one and then decide whether it's actually connected or not.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like that might be part of the clinical precision in his going into these places. He doesn't knock stuff over. He doesn't take stuff. He's not giving away what he's interested in or not, or what he cares about. There's nothing that he's selling to pawn shops.
Mm-hmm.
He's hardly taking any money. So if there was a stack of bills that had serial numbers or that called the police, he never took it.
Yeah.
There's so little evidence from the original ones. It's wild that someone can kill that many people and not be caught.
Yeah.
In 33 years. The first one was over 33 years ago.
I just pulled up the camera footage and it's a very clear picture of his face.
Yes.
And no one knows who it is.
That's why we have to cover cold cases.
Yeah.
Because had you guys heard of this?
No.
So that means there are more people out there that haven't heard of it, that haven't looked at that. And we will link that because someone somewhere knows something.
Especially if they just circulated that photo mostly in Indiana. I mean, you can look it up and find it online, but we didn't know. We're not.
You have to know to look it up. Exactly. Yep. I think that's why even if other people or people investigates have covered this, I still think it's important to cover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. Oh, wait. No, never mind.
You're not curious?
Well, I forgot that you said that Vicky never saw his face because I was wondering if they ever showed her like this footage, but I just remembered that you said that she never saw his face.
Yeah.
All she knew.
What about the witness who saw him in Wichita? Did they speak with him again and show him that?
I believe they did. I'm not sure on what they found out. I'll have to look that up.
And maybe he didn't remember.
Maybe.
That was, what,
10 years?
10 years later?
Yeah.
And he probably only saw him for 1 minute.
And he was scared.
Yeah.
Right. It was a guy holding a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Terrible.
So there were people who saw him from the Sarah murder too.
Mm-hmm. But only running away.
Yeah. So not up close of his face or anything.
He didn't go in until after he heard the gunshot.
Oh.
And
he didn't see him coming out?
I'm not sure if
you
he
saw him
didn't
going around a corner, you said. And then the other guy saw him running to the freeway.
Right.
The hill. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it seems more like they got the height, the build, the hair color, what he was wearing, and that's it.
That's it.
It really is a phantom. It's so crazy.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is an intriguing case for sure.
It is. I hope they get him.
I hope so too.
All right. Well, we would love to hear what you think. And I'd love to hear if you've heard of this case before or if this is your first time hearing about it. If the picture resembles anyone to you. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you are looking for the resources that we used, you can head over to our blog. It's linked on our website, crimeclueless.com, and it's under the contributors section. We would love if you would follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Just search for @CrimeClueless. If you have any true crime stories of your own, we'd love to hear them. Send us an email, crimeclueless@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate, review, or share our podcast. Your support helps us reach more listeners, which, maybe more people that have never seen a picture of the I-70 killer.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps us grow our community. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, iHeart, and all major streaming platforms. Thanks again. And remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.